Well, welcome to the Compass. My name is Tyler Feller, and I am here with Dr. Brad Robison from Brad Robison, MD and Associates. And we have been building out a series of resources called the Compass over on our website, bradrobisonmd.com. Just click on the Compass. And part of what we're trying to do is educate and communicate a lot of different philosophies of the practice that Dr. Robison has, but also help people sort of in that waiting. And one of the things that I think would be really great to talk about, Dr. Robison, is this idea of hope. I've heard hope defined recently as joy about a breakthrough before the breakthrough has happened.
Mm.
How important is hope in long-term therapeutic, meaningful relationships?
Oh yeah. Um, Exceedingly important. It's incredibly important part of, I would say, all of our lives and human existence. But it's interesting uh, that we bring this up. I mean, just before I sat down to do this with you, I was meeting with somebody who's had some chronic depression that's neurobiologically based. I mean, in outward kind of perspective, you would see this person as, you know, coming from, no real significant trauma, some loss, death in the family, and that was, somewhat unexpected, but, and high functioning college graduate, overall doing well. But the reality is, has struggled for several years with what really is a neurobiologically based depression, and that is beginning to get better. We're getting some of the medicines right. We're trying a new medicine trial that seems to be helping. But what we were just talking about is the fact that as the biology of depression is getting better, we talked about how that, like, when people end up down in that hole,
Yeah.
depression, a lot of times it's a snowball. It's
Yeah.
like the biology, and then life stressors, and maybe a loss, and then your energy start to constrict, and you feel like less and less getting out, and you're not eating as healthy, and you're not exercising as healthy, and your thinking begins to deteriorate. And so it's a snowball down into that
Yeah.
hole. And we were just talking about how that, like, it's recovery also is a snowball
Yeah.
into feeling better. And so we were talking about that she's feeling physically, like neurophysiologically, this medicine is seeming to work. And so she's physically better and starting to exercise and starting to get, out more and spend time with friends, and it's starting to snowball. And we were just talking about, like, one of the things that I was encouraging her is really, like, look for those little rays of sunlight, hope. We were talking about that,
Yeah.
like, that sometimes hope is not something that we can manufacture. The analogy that I was just using, the little metaphor I was just using with her, is that it's almost like, there's been this really bad dark storm cloud for so
Mm.
many days that you're almost thinking, well, I don't even know if the sun exists anymore. And you've tried to manufacture the sun, you've tried
Yeah.
to manufacture hope or joy, but you realize you can't do it. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't keep doing good, healthy coping, but you also have to, like, when the rays of sunlight break through that dark cloud, you kind of got to run to them and just kind of
Yeah.
go, this is
Mhm.
not, yeah, this feels good. And then the next little ray of sunlight's over there, and you go over there. And so I feel like in some ways what you're talking about with hope is, I like your definition. I mean, it's that sense that, okay, I can't manufacture those rays of sunlight, but I still know the sun's up there somewhere
Yeah.
behind all those
Yeah.
dark clouds.
Yeah.
And so, and then when I see a little ray of sunlight, I go and I just, like, yeah. And that renews it renews a sense of joy, which renews a sense of hope. And then that snowball,
Yeah. The
that,
opposite. Yeah.
yeah, starts
I
moving.
guess a good snowball would be the opposite of a spiral. I find it really fascinating what you're talking about, and just even as you're talking more from a scientific thing that you and I've had conversations about, depression and anxiety are often coupled together, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So is there an in between, or how does it work? Does someone, they're in depression and they sort of switch into anxiety mode? Is there a little hope in between those two things? How does it work?
Yeah. It's um I don't know. It's probably in some ways some of that's unique to each individual. I mean, we use our DSM-5 diagnostic category, which are important for a lot of reasons, but each individual is still, a unique individual. And I think that um, depression, anxiety, fear, worry. I mean, at that bigger picture level of hope and joy, depression, fear, as opposed to like the DSM diagnoses. Yeah, I think there's a lot of continuum or overlap there. We get sucked into many times a whole part of the snowball going downhill is fear, worry. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? Is this going to be okay? Then sadness, depression, like, oh, man, things aren't working out. This has happened. It's sometimes a little bit more focused on the rear view mirror, depression, sadness, hurt. And then those things, fear, hurt, depression, snowball. And what happens, I think, is it's like that. It's like those storm clouds rolling in that
Yeah.
start to cover up the sun of hope and joy. And it's not that hope isn't there. It's not that joy isn't there, but there are these other things that cover it. And that starts to get into the whole conversation that I do talk a lot about with patients, and in a much more clinically practical way. I mean, as opposed to like, gosh, there's people, poets and philosophers and theologians write on these topics, volumes. And so I'm not
One of
trying.
my favorite is hope deferred makes the soul sick.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And so, I'm not trying to like, do a long treatise on the subject with my patients or here on this video, but I do talk to folks about the fact that is hope is a thing. It's external to us. Hope isn't, in a sense, an emotion that's internal to us like joy. There are some transcendent truths of hope and joy that are bigger than our what we can manufacture, and our circumstances, our emotions are like those storm clouds that get in the way. But the truth is still there, and we need to be able to catch glimpses of it, like you
Okay.
said. I mean, because if anybody goes for days
Yeah.
with that hope deferred, I mean, if we're just not seeing the manifestations of those things, yeah, it's
Is hope, is it birthed, or is there breakthrough, sort of that sun coming through the clouds when someone gets a diagnosis that they've been waiting for, or is it when they get a roadmap, now they have a plan to sort of, when do you first see that start to break through?
yeah. Uh, Great question, and that's a part of what I mean, aside from tons of reading and all that, but I'm just talking about clinical wisdom that I've gained from my patients. Just sitting with people for years. Um, that's a part of why I think about hope as this external thing, because it is like something that breaks through at different points in the journey, and it is different than like it may come when you get the diagnosis, because people are like, oh, finally, I kind of have an understanding, or parents kind of, may get a glimpse of hope when they're like, oh, okay, finally, I've got somebody that can really help me understand what's
Yeah.
going on. And so there's some degree of hope there. You know, some of that is about, just knowledge and skills building, and like, okay, let's take the diagnosis and then let's work on the skills and work on, treatment plans and all of that. And, but the treatment plans and the activities that we do and medicines or therapies aren't in and of themselves the hope. You know
Yeah,
what I'm
that's
saying? Like,
right. Yeah.
that's a part of the deal. Why I say and feel like, hope is not just it's not a prescription in a bottle or a do these steps, but it's this thing that we catch glimpses of, and it makes immense difference in terms of outcomes for people when they glimpse that and can get a hold of it.
Would you say that patience is hope despite tremendous obstacles?
Say that again.
Patience is hope despite tremendous obstacles.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a good definition. That's a good definition. And um, I think that goes along with exactly what you said. Goes along with great outcomes. I mean, it's not the degree or magnitude of the obstacle that dictates the prognosis and outcomes,
Mhm.
as much as the patience, persistence, perseverance, and hope that
Yeah.
people can over time muster, in really difficult circumstances.
Now, I've known you for a very long time, and whenever I was a teenager, I was at your house. I was friends with your son, and I was having a conversation with you about your practice. And one of the things that you said that I've always remembered was sort of what you do is like a tool belt, and you have tools and you sharpen them. And some of your tools are really sharp because you've been sharpening them for decades now. And it makes me think about a concept that's very important to you, and it's this idea of sacred spaces. Like
Hmm.
that's a tool that you have sharpened. And so I don't want to try to define it, though I have the concept in my head how you've said it, but I would love to hear you talk about how important it is for you to enter into these sacred spaces.
Yeah. I really think that that's so key at one level in terms of what we do. It's key to what we do here, but I think it's key to the human experience. It's key to um, truly being a practitioner of a healing arts. As opposed to just a technician. And so I think that the reality. Did we lose me there for a
You
second?
went down, yeah.
Okay, sorry
Y
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So,
okay. You just said
what
it's
I
the reality of the healing arts.
yeah, yeah. So sacred space, a part of how I would describe that is the idea that in human relationships we connect with one another, and hopefully we get to know one another, and um, here at our office our goal is to first and foremost create safe space where
Mm,
we're connecting, and it's safe. We're not out to hurt one another. We're here to support. We acknowledge the social contract, in a sense, of the relationship between myself and my patients, and we then work together to create safe space. And in that safe space, we're gonna we're gonna talk about a lot of stuff, and we're gonna work on diagnosis and treatment planning and all of that. But over time, as that safe space continues to grow, we begin to peel back. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. We're like, okay, well, let's look at this piece of it. Okay, well, let's go a little deeper and look at this piece. And so sometimes we're peeling back layers of biology and trying to figure out layers of biology together and figure out what are some interventions and things that might help the individual reach their goals and all that. And then we may pull back layers of the mind and psychology and
mm.
things. But the point there is, then in that safe space from time to time, and I can't make it happen or manufacture it any more than my patients can. But in that safe space, from time to time, we experience together something that is is sacred, divine, transcendent, hope, joy. Like it's like it kind of shows up in the room, and we both are like, oh,
Mm,
wow, what's that? And so to me, that's when safe space really becomes sacred space,
yeah.
in those transcendent moments.
A lot of your patients you start seeing when they're very young. Is it more difficult when they're young patients, or is it more difficult with adult patients?
Uh, that's interesting. That's interesting because in some ways I don't even hardly think about it like that, in that I think it's more difficult depending on where the individual is in the
Mm,
journey. And I see adults that are like at a place in their life, neurobiologically, psychologically, in every aspect, that I know, this is going to be a long journey. This is going to be a hard journey. And I see kids that are there, but I also see kids and adults sometimes that I'm like, wow, I'm entering and joining with them and developing safe space with them at a point in the journey where I'm like, oh wow, they're already like way over here in the journey. And so I don't see it as
mm.
necessarily more or less hard depending on their age, but more or less hard depending on kind of where they're at, what's going on in their journey, in a
I
sense.
I love how you say we believe that sacred space is a place to explore and experience the reality of God and become all we are created to be. Though we do not possess healing, nor can we give it, we believe that there are times in sacred space in which healing can occur. Can you tell me a story of that where a sacred space has led to healing?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I can. Yeah, lots of different stories, I think. And that's that just core idea that we're not technicians. I'm not a technician of I mean, I know a lot of technical things, like a good artist, a good musician understands the technical aspects of their instrument, of their art form, but I'm not a technician. And the folks here, we talk about this a lot. We're not technicians. Hopefully we've become artists, and because we know we're not technicians, we know that we don't possess healing like something that we can wield, or an
Mhm.
instrument or something that we can wield. Now we can help. Technically we can help with a lot of different things, but we don't wield that. And so we really look at this as an opportunity to join with people. And so an example that comes to mind, I mean, it's somebody that I just was talking to this week, who's moving forward into the next phase of their healing journey. And it does have to do, we've done a lot of stuff over time. We've talked about the neurobiology, and we've worked on peeling back the layers of that, and with medications and managing the medicine piece of it, overall, and kind of got that layer leveled out. And then we begin to deal with some childhood trauma
Mhm.
and those things, and begin to layer that and sort through that. But there was a period of time, it's been a while back now, where we began to talk about, the individual was kind of upset with me a little bit over an issue, something that I said, and it just kind of struck a nerve
Wow.
for this person. And we talked about it. And one of the things that came out was, I was asking, well, why did that strike a nerve? Why was that so important? And she said, well, because I really, this is such an important relationship to me. And I'm
Wow.
like, okay, well, tell me about that. Why is this so important? And she said, well, because I really trust you, and I wouldn't normally trust somebody, especially a guy.
Mm.
I said, well, okay, let's talk about that. And while we were talking, I wrote on a piece of paper, trust, and I just threw it on the floor in the space between us. And I started talking about, okay, did you bring trust in the room when you first met me and came in here? And she's like, oh, absolutely not. And I said, well, I, I'm generally, I guess, a trusting person, but I didn't know you. I don't feel like I brought trust in the room necessarily. But we then talked about over time how that there's this thing
Yeah.
that developed in the relationship, in the space between us, that we could call trust. And that we didn't necessarily bring it with us. It wasn't something that we manufactured on our own, but it showed up in the space between us. So then we began to talk about trusting in trust, that she began to understand that there's this thing beyond her
Mhm.
own thoughts and emotions that she didn't necessarily create, but she was beginning to trust that it was real and it had substance. And
Mm.
then a while after that, we had a kind of a similar moment, and I wrote hope down and we threw it forward,
Wow.
and so then then it became this thing, and we were just talking about that the other day. Now she's a lot further in her journey, and she said, I'm really beginning to understand what you were talking about, because she said, I'm beginning to see it in other places, and I'm
Yes.
beginning to realize, oh, that's not just something that I manufacture. It's not something that Dr. Robison sort of just has and gives to me, but it's this thing. It's got substance to it and reality to it, and she's beginning to be able to really walk in that. And to me,
Hmm.
that's like that
Yes.
healing journey that I don't, it's not a technical, like, I gave her the right medicine and her biology's better, or oh, I gave her 10 easy steps to change some of her coping. I mean, we've worked on those things too, but that wasn't what
Hmm.
this was. She and I both recognized that this thing was something that we don't possess,
Yep.
but it's there, and she's beginning to trust it. To me, that's like the healing journey. That's like sometimes in sacred space, healing happens.
I love it. Another way that you pinned it was in sacred space, you'll find despair transformed into hope, fear transformed into courage, anger transformed into passion, shame transformed into loving acceptance, and maybe, just maybe, joy will return to your journey. You've
Mm.
seen joy return to her?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think she would say that. I mean, I think she would say that she feels like that it is growing. In fact, that's some of what we were talking about this week. And I think she would say where she's at in the journey right now is, it's like she feels like she's got a much more solid kind of foundation of trust, a more solid foundation of hope. I think she gets little glimpses of joy, but I think, she's beginning to realize that joy is a thing, um and that it's not happy. I mean, she and I have talked a lot
Yeah.
about that, because she's had happy
Yeah.
kind of like a an activity director on a ship, as a
I
sort.
say happy is what happens to you, but joy is your DNA.
Yeah, right. And she's got like she's had happy since she was a little kid as an activity director on the ship, when other parts of her inner world are overwhelmed by fear or depression. Happy goes around going, "Oh, come on, happy, happy, happy. Let's make everything happy." But and
Yeah.
that kept going on into her adult life, but she realized how that was such a thin, I mean, it didn't have a whole
Mhm.
lot of depth to it. And now she's beginning to realize, oh, wait a minute, I am starting to catch a glimpse of something, that joy that has a whole lot more depth to it.
I would imagine that in her case and other people's cases, they're not used to sacred spaces in their relationships outside of your office. And
Right.
so, by virtue of what you're doing, I would imagine you're teaching them to be able to have those.
Right. Yeah.
And I even think about parents who have children that come in, and you're even teaching probably the parents how to handle their children in a way that opens up these sacred spaces.
Hmm.
And I've heard you talk too about there's very tiny windows sometimes with people to address issues or to talk about stuff with. And so you may have patients come in and it's just not a good day to talk about certain topics. So you play chess or you
Yeah.
just talk. Will you give us some insight into that? Like what's it like and how do you know when that's a window that's good for you to begin to open up some things inside of them?
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
That'd
I
be the technical side of what you do.
Exactly. That's what I started to say. Yeah, that's the technical side of it. The technical side of it is just kind of learning how to peel back the layers of the onion and know what's presented itself, what the person has opened up to. And sometimes it's just dealing with the reality of the biology. I mean, whether it's a kid with some just biologic ADHD, or the patient that I was talking about that I met with this morning before we started, that really does have pretty severe genetically predetermined neurobiologic depression. And we've had to deal with that layer of the onion a lot. But we've always been open to talking about other aspects of things. And so there are times that we are talking about coping, and she, I mean, it's almost it is a joke between us now. We laugh and joke about, like, my little continuous conversation about, well, now how are you doing it, getting some exercise, and
Mm,
trying to motivate and get her out of the house and get her active and all of that. And so there's that. So our conversations on the healing journey aren't always deep, but that's the cool thing about it, is that over time we've created enough safety so that when that depth is there, like when her dad passed away not that long ago, um, we were able to just go right into some of the depths of that grief, and some of the depths of the that kind
wow.
of existential
Hmm.
questioning that grief triggered, and we were able to go right into that. And that part was, yeah, that's the safe just the safety of the relationship makes the opportunity for those moments happen. And I just have learned over the years to trust that those moments do happen, so I'm just kind of, always watching for when it's like, oh yeah,
Mm,
right there's the opening, right there's the moment where we're both feeling it. Like, that's part of it. It's like, it's not just like, oh, here's my opening to push something, but it's
right.
more like, yeah, right there it is. And then I'm like, with the patient, I'm going, did you, okay, do you are you aware of that too? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, I'm aware of that. Like, I'm
Wow.
right there at that place.
It's like a seamless dance a little bit.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
guys in step together. Well, Dr. Brad, this has just been a really powerful conversation about hope in sacred spaces. Do you have any final words, anything left unsaid that you wanted to say?
I don't know. We've covered a lot, which is great. I guess the one thing that I think about, I mean, I still have a little, uncertainties about all this social media stuff. You've done a great job helping guide us with this, but I think my main thing is I really want this to be helpful to people.
Yeah.
And it's not. I don't. I don't at all claim to know everything there is to know. And like I said, I certainly don't intend this to be something that's, you know, the be all and end all. I mean, I'm not trying to present a deep theological perspective or a deep philosophical perspective. It's much more just literally the what wisdom I've gained sitting in this chair for years, just sitting with people. And I hope that part is really helpful to folks that might be watching this and kind of just wondering about, man, where's my ray of sunlight, And I'm like, I get it. I mean, there's not a clear cut formula that I can give you, but I can tell you that I've watched lots of people go through some really dark places and find those rays of sunlight, find that hope again. And so, like, I mean, hang on and keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Oh, well, that's so great, and I know that it is helping way more people than you realize. You'd be surprised the number of people who told me that they're interested in becoming a play therapist after the last episode of The Compass.
That's
So
all.
that's great. Thank you, Dr. Brad, for being with us on The Compass today. If you guys are interested in scheduling an appointment, you can call 573-334-7055, and we will see you soon on our next episode.